One broken Sumerian tablet contains a sentence that has fueled debate for decades. Some claim it proves certain humans were fed upon throughout their lives. Others argue that reading ignores everything written around it. The difference changes the entire story. Tonight we'll examine the original tablets, the translations, and the forgotten context that rarely appears in viral videos. By the end, you'll understand what the ancient scribes actually recorded and why historians still disagree about its meaning. Before we begin, tell us which country you're watching from, and let's uncover what these remarkable clay tablets truly reveal together. The story begins long before the internet turned a single sentence into thousands of headlines. It begins beneath the ruins of ancient Mesopotamia. During the 19th century, archaeologists uncovered thousands of clay tablets buried inside collapsed temples, royal libraries, and administrative buildings across cities such as Nippur, Ur, Nineveh, and Ashur. Many had survived for more than 4,000 years because fire had accidentally baked the clay, preserving the writing instead of destroying it. Each tablet carried lines pressed into wet clay using a reed stylus. That writing system is known today as cuneiform. At first, nobody could read it. For decades, the symbols looked like meaningless wedges. Only after scholars gradually deciphered the script did an extraordinary world begin to emerge. The tablet spoke about kings, floods, laws, astronomy, mathematics, trade, creation, and the relationship between humanity and the gods. Among those texts were passages that would eventually become the center of one of the most controversial debates in ancient history. The phrase that sparked the controversy was never meant to stand alone. Everything surrounding it changes how historians read the passage. One translation has often been summarized with the idea that certain humans were fed upon throughout their lives. On websites and social media, that line is frequently presented without the paragraphs before it or the explanations that follow. That shortcut creates a completely different impression. Ancient languages rarely work like modern English. A single Sumerian word can carry several meanings depending on grammar, context, and the purpose of the text. Translators therefore compare multiple copies, damaged fragments, and parallel inscriptions before settling on a reading. Responsible historians almost never build a conclusion from one isolated sentence. They study the complete document first. That careful process explains why different translations sometimes appear to disagree while remaining faithful to the same original tablet. The disagreement usually reflects uncertainty, not contradiction. The tablets themselves were never written for modern readers. They were created for priests, scribes, kings, and temple officials who already understood the culture behind every line. Many ideas that seemed obvious to them now require years of research to reconstruct. A single missing corner can erase an important word. One broken sign can completely change a sentence. Sometimes several versions of the same text survive, allowing researchers to compare copies written centuries apart. Other times, only one damaged fragment remains. Every translation therefore carries a degree of caution. That is one reason scholarly publications often include notes explaining alternative readings beside the main translation. Then another discovery made the mystery even deeper. Researchers noticed that the controversial wording appears within a much larger discussion about humanity's relationship with the divine, not as an isolated statement about invisible beings feeding on people. The surrounding passages describe responsibility, service, offerings, and maintaining the order of the world. Read together, the text sounds far more like a religious explanation of humanity's purpose than a hidden description of supernatural predators. That broader setting is often missing from popular retellings. Instead, the most dramatic sentence is lifted from its historical background and presented as if it speaks for the entire tablet. Context disappears, the mystery grows. Understanding that missing context is essential because the next group of tablets asks an even bigger question. They no longer focus on what humans were doing. They ask why humanity was created in the first place. The answer would shape nearly every major creation story that followed across ancient Mesopotamia, and it begins with the decision made by the gods themselves. Most videos end the discussion after quoting one dramatic sentence. The ancient scribes did not. They continued writing, adding details that completely change how historians understand the passage. Reading only one line is like opening a book to the middle, reading a single paragraph and believing you've discovered the author's entire message. That approach creates more mystery than accuracy. If you're enjoying this documentary and want more evidence-based explorations of ancient tablets, subscribe now. Every week, we examine original texts, archaeological discoveries, and forgotten records that rarely appear in mainstream history. Now, let's return to the clay itself. The next lines reveal something almost every viral retelling leaves out. The controversial passages appear inside religious and ceremonial texts, where the relationship between humanity and the gods is described through the language of service, duty, and sacred obligation. To modern readers, those ideas can sound unfamiliar. To the Sumerians, they explain how the universe functioned. People cultivated crops. Priests performed rituals. Kings upheld justice. Communities maintained temples. Each role supported the larger order that the gods were believed to have established. Within that worldview, offerings were not viewed as feeding hungry beings in a literal biological sense. They represented respect, gratitude, covenant, and the continuation of cosmic balance. Ancient Mesopotamian temples received grain, bread, oil, livestock, textiles, and valuable goods every day. These offerings symbolized humanity's relationship with the divine while also supporting the temple economy, where priests, workers, craftsmen, and administrators lived and worked. Archaeological records confirm that temples functioned as far more than religious buildings. They operated as economic centers, educational institutions, storage facilities, administrative headquarters. The offerings described in many tablets therefore had both symbolic and practical purposes. Without understanding that system, modern readers can easily misunderstand the language surrounding service and sacrifice. Then another tablet repeats the same relationship, but with different words. Instead of emphasizing offerings, it focuses on responsibility. Several Sumerian and later Babylonian texts describe humanity as caretakers of the ordered world, maintaining irrigation canals, cultivating farmland, constructing cities, preserving temples, recording knowledge, and administering justice were all presented as sacred responsibilities. This pattern appears again and again across Mesopotamian literature. Different authors, different centuries. The same central idea. Human beings were expected to participate in maintaining order rather than living apart from it. That consistency gives historians an important clue. When several independent texts describe the same relationship using different language, researchers begin seeing a shared cultural belief instead of an isolated statement. The phrase, often translated as fed upon, therefore cannot be separated from this wider framework. Its meaning must fit the surrounding worldview. Otherwise, the translation begins saying something the rest of the literature does not support. This is exactly why professional Assyriologists rarely rely on dramatic headlines. They compare grammar, historical setting, parallel texts, religious customs, archaeological evidence. Only after combining all of those sources do they suggest a translation. Even then, many include alternative readings because damaged tablets rarely provide absolute certainty. That careful method may seem slower than internet speculation. It is also why scholarly translations continue improving decade after decade. One newly discovered fragment can clarify a sentence that remained uncertain for generations. One overlooked sign can change how an entire paragraph is understood. The search never truly ends. The discussion becomes even more interesting when another famous Mesopotamian text enters the picture. Instead of asking how humans served the gods, it asked why the gods needed humanity at all. The answer appears in the Atrahasis epic, where one decision made before civilization began would influence countless creation stories for thousands of years. The answer does not appear in a single tablet. It emerges after several ancient texts are read together. Among the most important is the Atrahasis epic, a Mesopotamian creation story copied by generations of scribes long before many later religious traditions were written down. It does not describe history in the modern scientific sense. Instead, it preserves how one of the world's earliest civilizations understood the beginning of humanity and its place in the universe. That perspective is what makes the text so valuable. It tells us what the Sumerians and later Babylonians believed, not what archaeology can prove literally happened. The next scene changes the entire discussion. Before humans existed, according to the Atrahasis epic, the younger gods performed the exhausting work required to keep the world functioning. They dug canals, managed rivers, cleared fields, and carried out the endless labor needed to maintain order across the land. Year after year, the burden grew heavier. Eventually, those divine workers refused to continue. The tablets describe them laying down their tools and gathering outside the dwelling of the chief gods in open protest. It is one of the oldest recorded stories about workers demanding relief from impossible labor. A solution had to be found. the senior gods considered their options. Rather than forcing the workers back into service, they chose to create a new being capable of carrying those responsibilities. Humanity became that solution. The text explains that humans were formed from clay mixed with the blood of a sacrificed divine figure, giving them both earthly substance and a connection to the divine world. Whether understood symbolically or literally within ancient belief, the message remains consistent. People entered creation with purpose. They would cultivate the land, maintain irrigation systems, raise cities, care for temples, produce food, preserve order. Their existence allowed the divine world and the human world to function together. This idea appears repeatedly across Mesopotamian literature. Human life was never described as meaningless. It always carried responsibility. Another creation story quietly confirms the same pattern. Centuries later, the Enuma Elish, the great Babylonian creation epic, presents a remarkably similar explanation. After the god Marduk defeats the forces of chaos and establishes order, humanity is created to assume the labor that had burdened the divine beings. Different story, different period, the same foundation. Human beings exist to help maintain an ordered world. Several divine groups appear throughout these traditions, including the Anunnaki, whose role changes depending on the text being read. Sometimes they act as judges of the underworld. In other stories, they serve among the higher ranks of the divine assembly, participating in decisions that shape the fate of humanity. Their responsibilities are not identical in every tablet. Mesopotamian mythology developed across many centuries, and different cities preserved different traditions. Understanding that evolution prevents a common mistake. There was never one official version of the myths. There were many. Even so, one principle remains surprisingly consistent. Civilization survives through cooperation. The gods uphold cosmic order. Humans uphold earthly order. Kings protect justice. Priests perform sacred rituals. Farmers grow food. Scribes preserve knowledge. Every role supports another. When that balance holds, society prospers. When it collapses, famine, conflict, disease, and political instability follow. This ancient worldview explains far more than one controversial phrase ever could. It also prepares us for the biggest twist in the entire investigation. Thousands of years after these tablets were written, modern authors began reading them through completely different ideas. In the process, careful translation slowly transformed into extraordinary claims that spread around the world, and that transformation explains why so many people believe the Sumerians were describing something the tablets never clearly say. The most dramatic part of this story was not written in ancient Mesopotamia. It was written thousands of years later. The clay tablets remained exactly as they had been for centuries, resting in museums and research collections around the world. Their words did not change. Their symbols did not change. What changed was the way modern readers began connecting those ancient texts to ideas that belonged to a completely different age. That shift created one of the most persistent myths surrounding Sumerian history. The transformation happened so gradually that many people never noticed it. As translations became easier to access during the 20th century, interest in Mesopotamian civilization exploded. Books, television documentaries, magazines, and later the internet introduced millions of people to names like Enki, Gilgamesh, and the Anunnaki. Some writers stayed close to the archaeological evidence. Others preferred a more sensational approach. Ancient myths became linked with extraterrestrial visitors, hidden civilizations, secret technologies, and invisible forces controlling humanity. Every new retelling added another layer of speculation until many readers could no longer separate the original tablets from the modern theories built around them. The internet accelerated that process. A single dramatic sentence spread much faster than an entire scholarly paper. Videos highlighted mysterious phrases while leaving out the surrounding paragraphs. Articles quoted isolated lines without explaining the religious traditions behind them. Social media rewarded certainty rather than careful discussion. Before long, millions of people encountered bold conclusions without ever seeing the evidence those conclusions were supposed to support. The original context quietly disappeared. One ancient name became especially famous during this period: the Anunnaki. Today, the word often appears alongside claims about hidden rulers, advanced visitors, or secret control over humanity. Those ideas dominate countless online discussions. The surviving Mesopotamian texts present a much more complicated picture. The Anunnaki are a group of divine beings whose responsibilities vary from one tradition to another. In some stories they participate in the divine assembly, in others they judge the dead or assist in maintaining cosmic order. Their roles change because Mesopotamian religion evolved over many centuries and across different cities. No surviving cuneiform tablet clearly describes the Anunnaki as invisible beings who survive by feeding on human fear, sadness, or emotional energy. That popular image comes from modern interpretation rather than ancient evidence. This distinction is important because it demonstrates how easily historical records can become mixed with contemporary ideas. Once a dramatic claim spreads widely enough, many people assume it must come directly from the original source. Often, it does not. Professional historians work very differently. Every proposed translation is compared against grammar, parallel inscriptions, archaeological context, and earlier publications. When uncertainty exists, scholars usually acknowledge it instead of replacing it with certainty. That cautious approach may seem less exciting. It is also what allows historical research to correct itself over time. New discoveries frequently improve older translations. Fresh excavations reveal missing pieces. Advanced imaging technology uncovers signs hidden beneath damage that earlier researchers could barely detect. History continues moving forward because researchers remain willing to revise conclusions when stronger evidence appears. The real achievement of the Sumerians is already extraordinary without adding unsupported claims. They created one of the world's earliest writing systems. They developed complex cities. They recorded laws, mathematics, astronomy, literature, and religious traditions that shaped civilizations for thousands of years. Those accomplishments are fully supported by archaeology. Even after separating later speculation from the original tablets, one important question still remains. If the Sumerians were not describing hidden beings feeding on human emotion, what message were they actually trying to preserve? The answer becomes clear only after every major creation text, temple record, and royal inscription is viewed together. At that point, a single pattern begins connecting nearly everything the ancient scribes left behind. After comparing the major Mesopotamian texts side by side, a clearer picture begins to emerge. Not because every mystery has been solved, because the same ideas appear again and again across different centuries, different cities, and different groups of scribes. The surviving evidence points toward a civilization that believed the universe depended on order. Every person had a place. Every responsibility mattered. Every action helped preserve the balance between the human world and the divine world. That principle connects far more of the tablets than any single controversial phrase ever could. The strongest clue was not hidden inside one famous inscription. It appears across the entire written tradition. The Atrahasis epic explains why humanity was created. The Enuma Elish describes how order replaced chaos. The Epic of Gilgamesh explores mortality and humanity's search for lasting life. Temple hymns praise the gods while emphasizing wisdom, justice, and responsibility. Royal inscriptions present kings as guardians chosen to preserve stability throughout the land. Different texts, different purposes, one consistent message. Civilization survives only when every part continues doing its work. The gods preserve cosmic order. Humanity preserves earthly order. Priests maintain sacred rituals. Farmers produce food. Builders raise cities. Scribes protect knowledge. Each role depends upon the others. Within that worldview, serving the divine was never presented as meaningless obedience. It was participation in keeping the world functioning. Understanding that idea changes how many difficult passages are interpreted. Words connected with service, offerings, and devotion belong inside that larger religious system, rather than being separated into isolated modern theories. Reading the tablets together produces a far more complete picture than reading individual quotations alone. Perhaps the greatest surprise is what the ancient writers valued above everything else: knowledge. Again and again, wisdom appears as civilization's greatest gift. The god Enki becomes the guardian of intelligence, craftsmanship, planning, and practical skill. The legendary Apkallu, the seven sages, bring writing, architecture, agriculture, law, measurement, and organized society to humanity. Cities grow because knowledge grows first. That pattern repeats throughout Mesopotamian history. Their temples served not only as places of worship but also as schools, archives, libraries, financial centers, and administrative headquarters. Thousands of clay tablets survived because generations of scribes believed preserving knowledge was one of the highest responsibilities anyone could carry. Without those scribes, almost everything we know about early civilization would have vanished. Their careful work still speaks across 4,000 years. Modern technology is helping historians hear those voices more clearly than ever before. High-resolution photography, multispectral imaging, three-dimensional scanning, and artificial intelligence are allowing researchers to recover damaged signs that once seemed permanently lost. Every improvement adds another small piece to the puzzle. Sometimes a missing word returns. Sometimes an entire sentence becomes readable. Occasionally, a fresh discovery forces historians to rethink an interpretation that had stood for decades. That is how historical research moves forward. Not through certainty, through evidence. The oldest surviving tablets continue reminding us that real history is usually more complex than popular myths. They describe humanity's responsibilities, the search for wisdom, the struggle to preserve order, and the hope that knowledge could outlast the generations that created it. Those themes remain remarkably familiar even today. The mystery, then, is not whether invisible beings secretly fed upon humanity. The deeper mystery is why one of Earth's earliest civilizations invested so much effort preserving these ideas for people they would never meet. Perhaps they believed every generation would face the same questions. Who are we? Why are we here? What responsibility do we carry? The clay tablets cannot answer every one of those questions. They simply pass them forward. And after 4,000 years, they are still waiting for someone willing to read them carefully. One forgotten tablet can change everything we think we know about the ancient world. If you enjoyed this investigation, watch the next documentary on your screen, where another Sumerian tablet reveals a mystery historians are still debating today. The oldest records are still waiting to be read.